Hello, thank you for joining us so much. Welcome to this virtual roundtable where we are discussing enabling the global energy transition, which is brought to you in association with the global power cable manufacturer Nexans. So I'm Sarah Lockett and I'm going to be hosting this 1 hour event, and we're going to introduce our panel to you now. So when I say your name, give us a wave so everyone knows who is who. So first of all, we have Ragnhild Katteland, who is Executive Vice President, Subsea and Land Systems Business Group at Nexans. Also, we have John Hill, who is Project Director at SSE, formerly Scottish and Southern Energy, and also Ulrik Stridbeck, Vice President for Group Regulatory Affairs at Orsted, the Danish multinational power company. So just to let you know how this is going to run over the next hour, the session is being recorded. It'll be posted online after we finish, so look out for that. And we'll be taking questions from the attendees, the audience, and so do post your questions in the Q&A function, and we'll save those up for the sort of last third of the hour to ask to our panelists, kind of thing. So most G20 countries have announced COVID recovery packages to help their economies after the coronavirus pandemic. And so Japan's is over 20% of its GDP. So these are very large amounts of money. So if this could be the moment when governments could choose to use those recovery packages to boost clean energy, renewable energy, and let fossil fuels take a back seat. So is that going to happen? We're going to be asking that today. Is this the start of the real global transition to clean energy? And what are the challenges that are going to come with that? So that's what we're speaking about today. So first of all, if we look at what governments could do, what they should do, what the panel would like them to do. So we know that twice as much is spent generally on supporting fossil fuels than is spent on supporting renewable energy, clean energy in the COVID recovery packages. And the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has urged governments to stop doing this. So what I would say to the panel, and I'm going to ask Ragnhild first, what would you say to persuade governments to use this moment to back clean energy?
Thank you, Sarah. Now we see amid global pandemic, the green sector is regarding as a core component of our economic recovery rather than as a hindrance to growth. So clearly, let's use this, let all the governments, everyone use this opportunity to really flush this market and to ensure that we are increasing and pushing forward the greener energy. Yes.
I tell you what, let me throw that over to Ulrik, that question. What would you say to governments to back renewables at this moment?
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting and setting this up. Our view to this is that the path towards decarbonization and developing renewable energy infrastructure, that is a very sensible thing to do in the first place. It is a route that any country will have to take sooner or later. So combining the two crises, the health crisis and the climate crisis, and take that opportunity to start investing or intensifying investing in renewable energy investments that will have to take place anyway, that just makes a very, very good sense. Actually, we cannot afford not to do that.
And we've got John back now. So if you can just give us your response to that, what you would say to governments in this sort of these COVID recovery packages to back renewables. I'm not sure whether you've frozen again or maybe you're just being very still, but what would you say about that? I'm afraid we're going to have to come back to John. He might have to kind of dial in again or just reconnect to this panel discussion. Because, I mean, if we think about in the UK, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak has announced a big package to help out. He's done the £2 billion Green Homes Grant, £1 billion to improve energy efficiency of public sector buildings. So there is a big package being done, isn't there? John, you're back with us. Let's just grab a quick moment while we've got your signal.
Yeah, so I was saying that in the UK, it's part of a long-term program of investment in renewables and regulatory change to allow significant investment, particularly in the electricity sector. So last year in the auction round, over 6 gigawatts was allocated for offshore wind. That in itself means 20 billion-ish of investment is now actively happening. And next year there'll be another auction round with a similar amount. So within the sector, within the electricity sector, the vast majority of funding is flowing towards
renewables. I think you were going to say that, and possibly specifically offshore wind.
Has improved.
Would you agree with that, that the sort of UK policy, I suppose we're ahead of the curve in the UK, aren't we, on offshore wind and on renewables generally, would you say, Ragnhild and Ulrich?
If I jump in here, I think, yes, UK definitely is forefront, but also different countries catching up quickly. And I think for these European countries like Poland, France, and Netherlands, for example, they have already issued green sovereign bonds. And the proceeds of to spend specific environmental projects, which is renewable energy or public transport. In Norway, as another example, is looking into direct funding of technology development of floating offshore wind as well to push this now green movement and to help also in the COVID-19 crisis.
Do you think that there has to be that government help? Because now all the green energy has become, it's not more expensive than fossil fuel energy, is it? So does it still need subsidies and help, do you think?
If I may jump in there. So I think there is a very, very big difference between subsidies, as you talk about, which is, I think, defined by being the cost gap between the fossil alternative and the renewable alternative. And there is not such a cost gap anymore. It's gone. Costs have come down. But a very different thing is the need for risk management, the need for risk taking that you need to bring this investment forward. I'll give you one example. So governments, countries, they are also leading the way in these investments, not least the UK, because we all understand that we will have to do a lot of electrification. We will have to start driving electric vehicles. We will have to electrify industrial processes, heating, and so on. But we as investors, Orsted, SSE, we don't quite know when this will happen. We don't quite know when exactly the need for the electricity will be there. I think this requires a private-public agreement, and that is why these investments, they will still need a firm contract. It's not a subsidy. It's actually a very, very good deal, but it's an agreement on a firm contract, since the political uncertainties are so big. So without it, these investments would not happen.
Would you agree with that, John?
Yeah, completely. I think it's what we've seen is that it maybe is not fully understood that offshore wind is not a subsidized technology anymore. It does not require government subsidy. I think the biggest challenge, and it's an even bigger challenge the more renewables you get on any given system, is what is the mechanism for a route to market for these projects, for the generation.
Might have just lost John a little bit again. I tell you what I will do. Sorry, John, I think we've just frozen you there a little bit. I'm going to ask really Ulrich, as I've got a better signal with you. Spending on clean energy has sort of been stuck at about a third of overall energy spend, hasn't it? Sorry, John, we lost you there just for a little bit. So I kind of went on to the next question. So we've kind of got the clean energy spend being stuck at around a third of what's being spent overall on energy. Do you think we're being over optimistic in thinking that that will suddenly soar upwards?
Well, it's my perspective on the electricity sector. I don't see that a third. I'd see the vast majority of spend is going into renewables technology in the UK. In other countries, it may well be different. And that's the electricity sector. So in a way, the electricity sector is the first to green its way, decarbonize its way. After that, it's the transport sector. And after that, it's heat. in terms of the economics and the technology used. So for electricity, I'd say the vast majority of spending, capital spending and government support is going in the right direction in renewables.
What do you think, Ulrich?
Yeah, I fully agree to that. Globally, you may be right that in terms of spend, still a lot is going into fossil-based in, for example, China and India, but certainly in Europe, in North America, the vast majority is going into renewable energy. It's simply the preferred choice today. Of course, there's still some ongoing projects that were planned some time ago, fossil-based plants where investments are still taking place. But the vast majority, the big focus, certainly in Europe, is in renewable energy and in the supporting systems like grids to support that attracts the investments today.
What do you think, Ragnhild? Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely. And we are working very closely together with the developers to have these also these costs at the right level, and that we are really competing with the fossil energy sector, or more than competing. So yes, and today I can tell you, for example, in UK, Nexans subsea and land cables with SSC, Beatrice project, and also with Seagreen, we're providing power for up to 1 million Scottish homes, helping UK achieving these clean energy targets that we are seeing in the future.
And I have in my notes, it says, offshore wind power will soon be so cheap to produce, it will undercut fossil fueled power stations, maybe the cheapest form of energy, particularly for the UK. And actually, if it's the cheapest, then the market is going to go for it. But is there enough of it?
I think if I respond to that, I mean, my view is there is a huge orders of magnitude.
I'm afraid we are struggling with John, and I hate to cut him off because it probably, as soon as I start talking, he'll start talking, but I think I'm going to move it back over.
If I try to...
Say again, Ulrich, sorry, you just chipped in there.
So if I chip in, it is so that certainly onshore wind installed at good positions is even cheaper than offshore wind. The only problem with that is that there is quite a lot of local resistance, local opposition. So there are basically limits, bigger limits to what can be built onshore. But investments in onshore wind will certainly also have to be carried out. But offshore wind is the, I would say, bulk resource of cheap, very cheap electricity that we have certainly around the North Sea, certainly around the Baltic Sea, certainly around the, or along the northeast of the US, in some parts of Asia. So, you know, people live on land, and offshore it's out of sight. So for bulk supply of cheap renewable resources, offshore wind is a fantastic opportunity and possibility.
And also the wind currents are more stable, aren't they, at sea? Are they less variable? So, am I right?
So it's more expensive, but the winds are stronger and the winds are more stable. You're correct, absolutely.
And if we think about, you know, why doesn't wind or solar power, for that matter, attract universal support amongst different governments? I mean, we don't want to single out the US, but some governments are more on board than others. And what can you do about that?
John, I expect you jump in, but if I try to take that one as well, I think there is one layer at least of excuse which is fair, and that is that countries like Switzerland, it's okay that they're not so interested in offshore wind. You have to have the resource. You have to have an ocean, and at least for the time being, it also has to be fairly shallow so that you can invest it, so you can build these facilities. And there's not so many countries that has that. Northern part of Europe, some parts of the US, some parts of South America as well, some countries in Asia. And it is my view, and certainly our experience as a company, that more or less all these countries, all these nations, with conditions that are beneficial for offshore wind, they are now paying attention. They are starting to develop policies and ambitions to harvest that resource. So I think we are on a very, very good track with that. But it has taken some time, and it will still take some time. It takes time to develop this industry locally.
Ragnhild, would you agree with that? I see you nodding.
No, it's clear that we are on a very, very good way, and we see now that some latest projects, they're actually paying money back to the governments also. So it's a very positive approach and a very positive results of the developments and the project that we're now putting in place. So yes.
Just to remind people watching to do post your questions in the Q&A function so that we can take those towards the end kind of thing. And just, John, you didn't get a chance to answer that one, that, you know, not all governments are on board, but are you seeing it move?
Yeah, I think it takes a regulatory and an environmental regulatory framework and a development pipeline to develop in any country.
It does take a while, doesn't it? Yes. Sorry, we lost you a little bit there. Let me just put a question which has come through, first of all, from someone in the audience, and I don't know who wants to take it. Offshore wind has moved from subsidy to stabilization, firm contract approach, but floating offshore wind is the next step up and is at a different stage. Can one regime support both? If floating wind should be treated as a new technology, how should it be brought forward? I mean, what you're saying is it's no longer new, or does it still count as new, just being a few decades old? What do you think? Maybe Ragnhild or Ulrich?
At least for our industry, from the cabling industry. In a way, we are now, for floating offshore wind, we will use a similar technology as we have already used for the type of platforms that we had in the past. And I guess that's also why, like Orsted and others are jumping, previous oil companies are jumping into this one and into this floating offshore wind, because it's really a similar type of technologies. To make this move forward, I do think that we need to put in place the same schemes as we did probably when we started the first offshore wind, meaning a joint effort between the governments, funding, the industries, the developers, to make this a cost and reliable solution forward. We have already made the first commercial wind farm. It's in operation and has been in operation since 2017 outside Scotland, Highwind Scotland, and it's working well. And now we have several floating offshore wind farms being developed forward. But clearly, still, it is more costly than the bottom fix. So still, we need to do some development and together to drive these cost bases forward to a lower level.
And that Highwind, that is your project, isn't it, John?
Oh, it's not an SSE project. I think it's another developer is developing that project. I mean, we see offshore floating wind, offshore wind as a future technology. It obviously opens up a huge new areas of seabed to development of wind generation. But obviously the cost competitiveness of that is going to be critical. As a technology, it may be 5 to 10 years out to make it as cost competitive as current technologies. But it's it's definitely coming in the pipeline. Yeah.
And you said just a little technical thing. You were saying only certain coastlines are suitable because they have to be quite shallow. I think you were saying that, Ulrich. So, and you're saying only certain parts of the US coastline. Does the land dip away from under the sea too sharply? Then is that your problem?
So from my point of view, there, yes, indeed, and I agree with John that floating will, everything else being equal, continue to be more costly than bottom fixed. Maybe sometime it will be able to compete directly, but floating is for that reason mainly relevant now to develop for those coasts, for those countries that have deep waters, where they do not have so much shallow coastline. And that will be, of course, some parts of Europe, but mainly places like California, Japan, Korea, Taiwan as well, where there is some capacity for bottom fixed, but if they really want to scale up, it will have to be floating. So I agree with Ragnhild and John. There will have to be a catch up. There will have to be a technology development. This is still not a mature, or the floating feature is still not mature. It will have to catch up, and it will require special schemes for some time at least.
Fantastic. I'm just noticing there are some questions which are appearing in the chat function. So do use the Q&A function because that's where we're collating all the questions. So if you can do that kind of thing. If I just have one for Ragnhild now. So by 2050, we know that Europe wants to be the world's first climate neutral continent for the whole continent. And what are the main challenges or barriers in your view to achieving that?
I think first of all, it's several different things to consider in this one, but it's particularly three key areas that I see that is important for us to achieve this. It's both supply security, it's of affordability, and it's of course also sustainability. And if I touch upon a little bit on these three areas, for supply security, we need to have a good quality, reliability of the supplies, and it will be even more important as electricity becomes the primary energy source. The grids, the distribution networks will need to be smarter and also more resilient to cater for these new loads like electrical vehicles and so on. And it's also increased decentralization and higher levels of intermittency. And then of course for the subsea grids, and for the new interconnectors, it will be needed to promote energy trading and also.
Now it's Ragnhild's turn to freeze. But I think, guys, would you chip in on anything that she was saying there? Maybe John?
No, you pass that one to Ulrich.
Yeah, because I think, sorry, we just lost you there briefly, Ragnhild, but I see you're back now. You were mid-sentence, but you were talking about the security of the supply. Is that, do you mean the intermittency of it?
Yeah, I mean, if we don't have a security of supply, we will not trust the sources. So clearly we need to build this, to be climate neutral and to build on these subsea grids, new interconnectors, wind, solar, and so on. We need to have security of the supplies.
And when you say the security of the supply, what do you mean?
It means that when you push a button that you know that you will get the energy out.
Is that a problem or not?
In some areas, yes. When you start loading a lot of items like electrical vehicles or other types of items, in a way you're overloading the network if you have not planned the network smart. It's like, yeah.
So that's something that needs to be worked out. Is that underway? Are people working on that or?
Definitely, yes. And we have some cities in particular that has come a very long way of thinking smart cities, combining all this together. And then, of course, what you also have is on the high level grids. You are also connecting countries. We are connecting continents to ensure that we have the supply security in place in case you have something happening in your network.
Yeah, and that could be the network congestion, can't it? As you say, you get an overload when there's too much demand, and then when it isn't, the storage is always still a problem, is it? They're saying you can't build these enormous batteries to store. You've got to use it quite quickly. Is that still a problem or not?
I would definitely say it's, Ulrich, John, jump in, but yes, of course, still it is a problem. I live in Norway. I'm Norwegian, so I'm a little bit lucky because we have hydropower. So we are storing the energy in form of water. But clearly, other places, if you have wind, you are dependent on it's a fresh energy source. Yes.
If I can just move it on to thinking about the US, if we think about offshore wind in the US, which we've talked a little bit, is it a key sort of element? We do have Trump sort of saying coal and oil and, the old mining, the coal mining is key, but is it a big element of the sort of power supply in the US? And is there any way that it can become more important?
So we are active, Orsted is active both onshore wind and with offshore wind in the US. And onshore wind has been advancing at a very, very high speed over many years, attracting a lot of investment, also solar PV. And it is my impression, of course, there is policies around that, supporting that, but it is clearly my impression that the main reason for attracting these investments is that it's common sense, it's good business, it's competitive. And we can also see that the states along the northeast of the US, they have seen that they have fantastic conditions for offshore wind, and they have been starting to develop regulatory schemes to support that over the last few years. We are there, several other developers are there, and investments are now taking place. So the US states are attracting a lot of investments in renewable energy. This is what is happening on the ground. Then there is, of course, a lot of political issues that has to be discussed and dealt with. I can just see as an investor, investments are taking place, and it's a very, very promising market. And American policymakers, is our impression, they have seen this opportunity, not least also for US industry as a job creator, as a job engine. So very, very promising developments there.
And John, I was thinking in Europe, we're seeing the oil giants. We've got Equinor, which is a Norwegian company, and also Total. They're moving towards renewables. Is that being reflected in sort of all energy companies? The oil companies are they all doing both, or not so much, would you say, John?
I think it's early days for a lot of them. Equinor is probably one of the more advanced ones. Total is a company that's just invested and become 50% shareholder in Project Dam Building, which is Seagreen. And that's their first major investment in offshore wind. They've got a major policy to move into renewables, as has BP recently announced. Some of these companies talked about renewables for quite some time and been in the market and then out of the market. The current policies and strategies seem to be more with more conviction. But how they're going to enter that market, I think, is going to be a big challenge for them, given that the development of projects has a significant time frame to develop a project. It could be 10 years before a project comes to fruition. So anybody wanting to have a big position in the market is going to have to find a way into that market, and it'll take a long time.
Very long lead times, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we think about, we spoke about California a little bit earlier, didn't we? And they've put it in their law that all of the state's electricity is going to be zero carbon by 2045. That's what they're aiming for. And that the economy will be carbon neutral by 2045 as well. So you see offshore wind, you're saying California is well placed for offshore wind. Have they announced that offshore wind will play a certain part in that, or have they not said?
Personally, I'm not familiar with the regulatory framework in California.
Either of the other guys?
Yeah, so the Californians, they are absolutely attentive.
Sorry, John, we lost you there. So I just threw that over to Ulrich.
Yeah, so Californian policymakers are definitely tentative of the offshore opportunity, but it's very deep, and it gets deep very quickly. So it will have to be floating. So they are part of this floating development. But it's my impression that it's fairly high on the list of priorities to meet their 2045 decarbonization target. So California is an important market for the floating development, certainly.
And just to add on to support this one, Ulrik, clearly, yes, in California, what we see is that they're really pushing towards floating, because that is the only wind that they're able to do there due to the deep waters. And they're truly pushing toward. So they form quite a lot of consortium to push this together with the industries to push this quicker forward. But it takes time. Just to add on the US as well, Sarah, Nexans as such, we also support Orsted and the other developers definitely in the US market. We do see this as an important market, and we do believe that this will be pushed towards wind, especially on the West Coast, very near future. So we are even setting up our submarine cable factory in Charleston, US, just for this one.
I was going to say, because we must have quite a lot of expertise in Europe, but I guess maybe the US has some good expertise as well. Do you think?
Oh, absolutely. If I may answer, the US is it's an industrial nation. There's nothing they cannot achieve. So having a supply chain, that's your area, Ragnhild, but having a supply chain develop in the US makes perfectly good sense. It is taking place, and there are very large US-based companies also in this area.
Can I just, while we're talking about the US, ask you about Canada? So we've had a question in, can anyone speak about offshore wind potential floating or on land in Canada? Is that a big market for offshore, for wind, do you think? Or not so much? Do they have more hydro?
So actually, there is a lot of onshore wind installed in Canada, onshore. The offshore, there has been a few projects discussed, both east and west, and actually also in the Great Lakes, but they have, to my knowledge, still not really come to fruition yet, for several reasons. But the Canadians, like the Norwegians, they are also so fortunate that they have other good sources of renewable energy, namely hydro. And that's good for them. So maybe offshore wind is not on the highest of the agenda, but it is my impression that it's being discussed and considered very seriously, also in Canada.
And if we look about how we get the power away from the turbines, how do you think that we can make sure that offshore wind is best used or exploited to meet world demand? Is one of the key sticking points actually getting the power from the turbines to the land, or is that the easy bit? Ragnhild?
I think I need to get John and Ulrik to answer if it's the easy part. But clearly for us, the technical challenge is to develop the cables for these wind farms, and to have the power cables installed so that they work in a reliable, sustainable way for all the years that these wind farms are operating.
And once they're installed, you've laid the cables on the bottom of the sea. Are they quite? Can you sort of leave them alone for 20 years, or do they need a lot of maintenance and things?
The cables themselves should be left alone. The only yes, I hope so. The only thing you need to do is to check the ends, the cable ends in a regular basis. But the cables themselves, if no anchoring damage or anything like that, they should be left alone, clearly.
And what are the key sort of challenges or the difficult parts of developing the cables, Ragnhild?
the cable technology itself, it's a mature technology. So what we do for each project is to go in and really do a proper review and design the cable routes and installation ways of doing it, protection of the cables. We do that on each occasion. Each project has a specific one.
And is distance a challenge? If you've got a 700 kilometer or a 20 kilometer, is distance a problem for you?
It is just the change of technology if it's further out. No, I mean, today we have two different technologies, depending a little bit on the distance and the power needed to bring onshore, so the size of the wind farms. But today with the wind farms where they are situated out in the sea, today it has not been seen as a problem at all. So it's more just the planning, it's more the engineering. If you do that properly, this is a very much a challenge to overcome.
You have to have like booster stations. Does it lose power over distance or not?
No. I mean, the stations, the wind farms are not that far out. So you have one export cable, what we call them export cable. So from the wind farm combined to shore, and it's no boosting, nothing. The distance is not that far. It's up to about Ulrik, John, about 100 kilometers approx normally, max.
Yeah, most of the UK projects are within that sort of range from distance offshore, the 70 to 100 kilometers, and then the next generation of projects will be 150 kilometers offshore, that sort of distance and maybe more, which is the different technology. It's the HVDC technology.
But we do have this technology as well. I mean, for if you talk about interconnectors, we are even now up to 750 kilometers in one long run with an interconnector. So this is, we're using these technologies between the different areas. So they're all mature technologies, so we can move to the next step.
And the interconnectors are the cables between countries, is that right, to take supply?
Typically between countries, between islands, yes, like Norway, UK, Denmark, Norway, Germany, UK, yes, these types of interconnectors.
And would you say, Ulrik and John, that now that we have the floating wind farm technology and we don't have to stay close to shore, is that the change, the step change that's really going to boost wind power, do you think?
I think this step change is actually the size of turbines. If we look at what's happened in the last 10, 12 years, turbines have doubled in size about every 5 years. 10, 12 years ago, we were at 3 megawatts, and now we're talking about 15 megawatt turbines. And it's that size of turbine which is driving significant cost reduction throughout the industry. So the next generation will be 15 megawatt, and the generation after that, who knows? But that is what is the primary driver. And actually, when you look at coastlines, particularly in the UK, there are vast areas of coastline that could still be developed in relatively shallow waters before you really need to go into deep waters offshore. But that's the UK. Other countries maybe go into deep waters relatively quickly. But to me, turbine size is the critical factor, and that's been accelerating really quickly over the last years.
And would people always go for quite close to shore for preference, and then when that's exhausted, then do the distance? Is that the way round they would do it?
That's how it's done today. The logical that's the cheapest is at relatively shallow waters, not necessarily close to shore. Those distances that John talked about, it's still fairly shallow actually, because of the sand seabed. So it's bottom fixed, even if it's really quite far from shore. And I would say that the step change, of course, going to floating, that could mark a step change. But I think the real step change is that today we have in Europe installed around 25 gigawatt of offshore wind. By 2050, we will probably have to have installed 450 gigawatt. So it's a massive, massive, massive increase. So the step change will have to be that we will scale up even further, driven also by bigger turbines, but building larger farms, building clusters of farms. That's the step change. And that brings us back also to what Ragnhild talked about earlier, that we will have to connect the offshore wind farms to more than one market, so that we can both send the offshore wind to shore, but sending it to different shores and trade. And secondly, and I would have chipped that in earlier on, where we talked about, I felt we left a little bit the topic as, with a problem for us of balancing and storage and these things. And indeed, that is a problem. But what I think is really, really fascinating here is that maybe the biggest problem is also our best solution, namely that to achieve what we need to achieve, we will also have to go to hydrogen and other advanced fuels, so that we can put renewable energy into the tanks of airplanes, ships, heavy trucks. We will have to make hydrogen. And if we can place that hydrogen production intelligently, and if we can connect offshore wind farms with more markets, then we can, at the same time as we are solving these core problems in heavy transportation, we are at the same time solving the main balancing problems that we have. We can use the power intelligently when it's there. And I think that's the fascination of what lies ahead of us, and what we will need to do. Build the grids, build the offshore wind farms, and build the hydrogen intelligently.
Interesting. Let me just, now you've mentioned that, ask one of the questions that has come in. Wind and solar are now mature and cost effective. Does that hinder investment in other renewables, especially tidal, that could have a useful role in providing relatable baseload? Who wants to take that? John?
Well, I mean, I'll give you a few thoughts. I mean, tidal by its nature is more likely, it's more predictable, but it's not base load. It's the percentage of time it would be producing power over a year would be, my guess is 20-30%. An offshore wind project at the moment is between 50 and 60% of production of its maximum capacity over a year. So in terms of what Ulrich mentioned earlier, in terms of bulk power generation for a system, offshore wind is improving all the time in terms of the quality of utilization of the assets and production of volume of power. And with higher wind speeds, bigger turbines, that just continues to improve. So I think in a way, yes, tidal will and nuclear will probably get substituted by offshore wind, because offshore wind will be vastly cheaper.
Interesting. Let me just ask another question that's come in, and I don't know who's going to take this. You mentioned that building a local supply chain is important, as mentioned, US offshore wind. Should the UK have concerns over its pan-European offshore wind supply chain post-Brexit? Are there any specific areas that have to be addressed to maintain that supply chain to the UK or to the EU? Who would like to take that? Who's itching to answer the lovely political question about Brexit? Ragnhild, you moved too quickly.
Oh my goodness. But,
do you think Brexit's going to affect anything, or probably will, or probably won't?
Of course, there will be a Brexit, but I do believe that we're so interconnected and that we cannot just put a border or a fence between the different countries or continents as such. I do believe that we will have some agreements coming up, so that we can continue this industry put forward. I think it will be a loss for all of us if that could not happen. So I trust that our politicians will find solutions so that we can move forward, and that that we can build on the competence and the supply chains and the work that has been done and been worked on now for several years together.
Do you think that, say, Norwegian Power will have a tariff for us in the UK and UK Power will have a tariff going to France or whatever? Do you see that coming or not? John, maybe.
There's still a possibility of different tariffs for imported equipment, or even the power set. The integration of the energy markets, I think, is a critical point. You know, we talk about interconnection and interconnectors. I know we mentioned the necessity of interconnecting markets to stabilize the networks. And Brexit throws up a bunch of challenges for that. None of them are, they can all be solved, but it requires some really careful policies to integrate a UK independent market with a continental European market. And some of the projects, I think, because of Brexit, have been delayed, that were related to interconnecting those markets. It's thrown up a lot of regulatory uncertainty in the time frame to maybe jeopardize some of those projects.
Are you worried, Ulrich, at all on Brexit, or is that one of your least worries at the moment?
Of course, we have concerns. Of course, we are trying to keep track of this intensely. The UK is by far our most important market. That's where we have installed the most. I am in Denmark right now. We're a mainly Danish-based company, even if we have a very large operation and a lot of staff in the UK. So of course, Brexit must be foreseen to cause trouble and concern. On the other hand, I agree very much with what Ragnhild and John is saying, that there are areas, certainly when it comes to the flow of energy, where it is so obviously in the interests of the citizens of the UK, of the citizens in Norway, in Denmark, that we must trust that good solutions will be found. The supply chain and the free flow of equipment, I suppose that is the same as the discussions of equipment in any other sector. It will be manageable. We are certain of it, but yes, we are concerned, and it's especially concerned that it causes some uncertainty and delays. But I'm sure good solutions will be found in the end.
We were speaking earlier on about this huge kind of upsurge in demand, weren't we, with electric vehicles and electric this and electric that. Do we actually have sufficient capacity in the system to supply enough for everything for everyone?
No, I don't think so. That's why we need Ragnhild. We need more grids for sure, both onshore and offshore. But it is also a given that you are disturbing people in their backyards when you're installing grids onshore. So it will be difficult, and that is also why we will have to do that as intelligently as possible, so that we are developing the grids in the most efficient way. And someone has to pay for it, so it has to also to be as cost effectively as possible.
Would you agree with that, Ragnhild?
Yes, of course. But when it comes to this question about capacity, as we see it today, it should be enough capacity there. So it's more the time of phasing and the planning, and then also with the energy efficiency, smarter grids, smarter cities, all these things, everything needs to be combined together. But we do need to have some more grids put in place, correct? But I think we're not that far away, at least today, of the capacity.
And just picking up on, we're talking about the UK, which is the world's biggest offshore wind market so far. I think I'm right in saying. John will be nodding there, I hope. So they're considering adding floating wind to the next round of Contract for Difference, or CFD auctions, which is the UK's mechanism for supporting and protecting power generators from wholesale electricity price fluctuations for 2021. So am I right in saying that, John? Have you seen any indication of that happening for the next round of those?
Well, the next round of government allocations is middle of next year, or they're calling it auction round 4. The government is currently consulting on what, how that round of auctions is structured, and floating is one of the technologies that they're looking at how they would support a development phase for that technology. It can't compete today against current offshore wind technology, and therefore it needs a separate type of government support to make the projects viable, or a number of projects viable, to develop and test the technologies. So it looks like they're going for it, as far as we can tell at the minute. And it's the same in Scotland. Scotland is promoting floating offshore wind as well.
Your optimistic kind of thing. And if we think about the interconnectors, which we spoke about earlier, didn't we, which is the cables carrying the supply between different countries, do you think that building those is one of the key enablers or the key things that will really make this market take off? Do you think that, Ragnhild?
I think definitely that the interconnectors are needed to ensure the links and the both reliabilities of these links. In case of power deficit, the grid would get faster injection if you were connected to some neighboring countries or sources. And I think also the interconnectors are increasingly important to boost the boost the security of the supply. Also by stabilizing prices, actually, and also to manage fluctuation in supply and demand, and to drive the uptake of low carbon technologies by helping to provide solutions to intermittency issues. So yes, I do believe that these interconnectors in a way enable us to share these renewable energy sources between these countries to drive us faster to a greener market.
And just for an idiot's guide, I mean, I kind of think of it as like building a road network. And so once you've built it, then the lorries will use it, or the electricity companies will use it to transfer their power from one customer or country to another. But who pays for it to be built or laid, for those cables to be laid in the first place? Is that a difficult point, or do you just know you have to invest up front and it's a big lead time for you? Ragnhild, is that the way it works?
Now we should have the TSOs and so on the panel, but at least for some of these interconnectors they are business cases. So it's a business case. So it's both that you need to have a reliable source or reliable and to secure the power supply in each country, but it's also a business case due to the trading mechanisms to build this. And yes, you might have some fundings for the governments and so on, but in the end, as for the wind farms, it is a business case. You are trading energy between the countries.
And let me just ask, sorry, Ulrich, you're about to speak?
Yeah, I would like to add there that, of course, building grid, including interconnectors, as Ragnhild said, it will be decided also based on an individual business case. But if we go up a little bit in the helicopter and consider that European countries, we will probably have to increase electricity consumption, total electricity consumption, with 150% by 2050. That's what the European Commission believes, thereabout. So a lot more electricity consumed and running through the grids. If we have to invest billions, large amounts in grids, still the share of grids in the final bill by consumers will probably decrease, because so much more electricity will be consumed. There are so many more electrons to carry the weight of the grid. So it's a lot of money, it's a lot of investment, but it's for transporting so much more electricity. And we have to remember that when we discuss the amounts. There's a lot more shoulders to carry that cost.
Important to remember that. And actually, John, we are coming towards the end of our hour. Can I get a sort of final thought from you? Anything that you've been burning to say, or any final call to arms, or something that you want the industry to do or governments to do, John?
No, I personally, I think the technology that's been proven over the last 10 or 15 years with offshore wind and continues to improve in terms of economics is still midway through its evolution, and it can potentially demonstrate a huge reduction in cost of energy, which it's done already, but even going forwards. And every country that has the possibility of developing it will look seriously at it for just those reasons, if not the reason for renewable energy and decarbonisation itself.
And just Ragnhild, just to wrap up, are there any sort of new developments in cable technology on the way? Or is it one of these things that the kind of actual technology of how a cable works is kind of fairly stable? Or are they always changing and being improved? And
I would say in the bigger picture is very stable. Of course, you have incremental steps, incremental improvements, and so on. But very in the long run, very stable. We are just an example. We are delivering more or less the same cable today as we delivered in the early 70s because it's so reliable, the technology and the way we're doing it. So yes, it's very reliable and stable, but step by step, of course, incremental improvements.
Fantastic. Ulrich, do you have any final thought that you want us to take away from this talk?
Maybe to follow up on John's and Ragnhild's comments and say that we're probably at the end of the beginning. Now we have developed this technology. We know how to do it. We can make it even cheaper. So today, it's not a discussion about whether we can afford it or not. Today, it's a discussion about whether we can afford not to do it. This is going to be a resource that underpins European competitiveness, not the opposite.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ulrich and John and Ragnhild. We have a hard stop at 3 o'clock, so I'd like to say thank you to all three of you for taking part in this discussion. It's been recorded and it's going to be made available to the attendees in the next few hours, so look out for that so you can re-watch and make sure you've got all those quotes quoted exactly right. But thank you so much for attending. Thank you to our production team, Sian Evans at Top Line Film, and also our question moderator, Katie Schuff at Top Line Communications. So thank you all of you for taking part. That's us come to an end, and thank you to our attendees for attending. That's it from us for now. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.